The cell was smaller than Maduro had imagined. 6 feet wide, 8 feet long, barely enough space for the narrow metal bunk bolted to the wall and the steel toilet sink combination in the corner. No window, no natural light, just a single fluorescent tube behind thick plastic, humming with an electrical frequency that seemed designed to prevent any possibility of peace. The door was solid steel with a narrow observation slot that guards could open from outside, allowing them to check on prisoners without warning or announcement. Maduro sat on the edge of the bunk, his orange jumpsuit still stiff and uncomfortable, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 18 hours. The helicopter extraction from Miraflores, the flight to the carrier group, the processing aboard the USS Iwo Jima, where they'd stripped him, searched him, photographed him, fingerprinted him, and cataloged him like a specimen in a laboratory. Through it all, he'd maintained a kind of numb detachment, as if this were happening to someone else, as if he were watching his own capture and humiliation from a safe distance. But now, alone in this cell, with nothing to distract him from reality, the full weight of his situation was beginning to crash down. He was a prisoner, an actual prisoner, held by a foreign military, facing decades in an American prison. Everything he'd built, everything he'd been, had been stripped away in a single night. The temperature was cold, deliberately so, not freezing, but uncomfortable enough to prevent restful sleep. Maduro had noticed during processing that every aspect of his detention seemed calculated for psychological impact. The brightness of the lights during intake, the unnecessary roughness of the guards, the way they'd made him stand naked for what felt like hours during the search, photographing every angle of his body for their records. Small humiliations designed to break down his sense of self, to remind him that he had no power here, no dignity, no rights beyond what his captors chose to grant him. He'd seen these techniques before, had even authorized their use against political prisoners in Venezuela. The irony wasn't lost on him. How many people had sat in cells like this one, in El Helicoide or other Venezuelan prisons, subjected to the same psychological warfare, while Maduro signed orders and attended meetings and convinced himself that such treatment was necessary for national security. Now he was on the receiving end, and the experience was teaching him things about suffering that he'd never truly understood from the comfortable distance of power. Time moved strangely in the cell. Without any natural light or clock, Maduro had no way to track hours passing. He tried counting seconds, tried maintaining an internal rhythm, but eventually lost track. Was it midnight? 3 in the morning? Still evening? The timelessness was itself a form of torture, creating a sense of disorientation that made it difficult to think clearly about anything. His mind kept returning to the moment of capture. Rafael standing there with the American operators, speaking perfect English, revealing himself as the betrayer. How long had Rafael been working for the Americans? Years, from the very beginning? Or had it been a recent decision, motivated by the $50 million reward that the U.S. government had placed on Maduro's head? And more importantly, who else had betrayed him? Rafael couldn't have provided all the intelligence needed for such a precise operation. There had to be others. People in his government, his military, his inner circle. People he'd trusted completely were probably American assets, and he had no way of knowing who they were or how deep the infiltration went. The observation slot in the door opened with a metallic scrape. Maduro looked up to see eyes staring at him through the narrow opening. American eyes, cold and evaluating. The slot closed again without a word. It would open periodically throughout what Maduro assumed was night. Random checks to ensure he wasn't attempting suicide or escape. Each time it opened, Maduro felt a fresh wave of humiliation. He couldn't even suffer in private. Every moment was observed, monitored, controlled. He lay back on the bunk, trying to find a comfortable position on the thin mattress. The pillow was barely thicker than a folded towel. The blanket was scratchy and inadequate for the cold temperature. Everything designed to prevent rest, to keep him off balance and exhausted. Sleep would be a mercy, an escape from the reality of his situation, and his captors clearly had no intention of granting mercy. Maduro's thoughts turned to Celia. Where was she? They'd been separated immediately after landing on the carrier, taken in different directions by different guards. Was she in a cell like this one, cold and alone and terrified, or had they housed her differently, given her some small comfort, because she was a woman, or because she was less important to their objectives? He desperately wanted to know that she was okay, that she was surviving this nightmare. But there was no way to find out. No communication, no information, just isolation and uncertainty and fear. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Maduro couldn't tell. He tried various mental exercises to maintain his sanity, reviewing his life chronologically, remembering key moments with as much detail as possible, reciting speeches he'd given over the years, mentally walking through the halls of Miraflores, trying to hold on to some sense of the world he'd lost. But every thought eventually circled back to the same central horror. He was trapped, completely and utterly trapped, at the mercy of people who had every reason to hate him and no reason to show compassion. The door opened without warning. Maduro sat up quickly, his heart racing. A man entered, mid-40s, wearing civilian clothes, carrying a folder. Behind him stood 2 armed guards, who positioned themselves just inside the doorway, hands on their weapons. The man pulled a folding chair from the corridor and set it up facing Maduro's bunk. "Good evening, Mr. Maduro. Or is it morning? Hard to tell down here, isn't it?" The man's Spanish was perfect, native speaker quality. "My name isn't important. What's important is that you and I are going to have a conversation." "I want to speak with my attorney," Maduro said, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. "And I want to know where my wife is. I have rights under international law." "You have no rights," the man interrupted calmly. "You're not on American soil, so constitutional protections don't apply. You're not a prisoner of war, so Geneva Conventions don't apply. You're in a kind of legal limbo, Mr. Maduro. We can hold you here as long as we want, under whatever conditions we choose, and there's not a damn thing anyone can do about it. Your attorney will get access to you eventually, but that's a privilege we grant, not a right you possess. So I suggest you stop talking about rights and start thinking about cooperation." The man opened his folder and pulled out several photographs, spreading them on the bunk beside Maduro. The first photo showed Rafael Escalona, sitting in what appeared to be an interrogation room, looking relaxed and cooperative. "Your bodyguard has been very helpful. He's provided detailed information about your daily routines, your security protocols, the layout of Miraflores Palace. He also confirmed something we suspected, but couldn't prove. You have several $billion hidden in offshore accounts, and you're the only person who knows all the account numbers and passwords. Rafael knew about some of them, but not all. We need you to provide that information." Maduro stared at the photo of Rafael, feeling a mixture of rage and betrayal so intense it was almost physical. "I'll never help you. That's what everyone says at first," the man said easily. "But you'd be surprised how quickly people change their minds once they understand their situation. Let me show you something else." He laid out another photograph. This one showed Delcy Rodriguez sitting in what appeared to be a government office, speaking with several people in suits. "Your vice president, now acting president of Venezuela, has been very pragmatic about the new reality. She's agreed to cooperate with the transition process we're implementing. Free elections within 6 months. International observers, economic reforms. She's being quite reasonable. Which makes me wonder, Mr. Maduro, why you would choose to be difficult when even your closest allies are accepting that the Chavista era is over." The photo was obviously staged. Maduro could tell from Delcy's body language, from the way the lighting seemed too perfect, that this wasn't a candid image, but the seed of doubt was planted anyway. Was Delcy cooperating? Had she already abandoned him and the revolution to save herself? "You're lying," Maduro said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" The man pulled out another document. "This is a transcript of acting President Rodriguez's first phone call with President Trump. She agreed to his terms within 90 minutes of assuming office. 24 hours to maintain order. 6 months to organize elections. She's already making public statements about transparency and democratic values. Your vice president sold you out before you'd even been processed aboard this ship. Maduro wanted to believe it was a lie, but the details were too specific. If they were fabricating evidence, why include timestamps and direct quotes? Unless that was exactly the point. To make the lie so detailed that it seemed real. Why are you telling me this? Maduro asked. What do you want from me? Information, the man said simply. Bank account numbers, passwords, the names of everyone who helped you hide money, locations of any physical assets like gold reserves or cash stores, details about your relationships with drug cartels, including names, locations, and operational procedures. Information about Russian and Chinese involvement in Venezuelan military and intelligence operations. Everything you know about corruption networks throughout Latin America. Give us that, and we'll make sure you're treated well during your detention and trial. And if I refuse, then the next few months are going to be very unpleasant for you. This cell will seem luxurious compared to where we'll move you. And Mr. Maduro, just so you understand the stakes, your wife is 3 decks above us. She's in a similar cell, facing similar pressure. We've offered her the same deal, cooperate and receive better treatment. Refuse and suffer the consequences. Now she doesn't have as much information as you do, so her value to us is lower. But she does know things. And if she starts cooperating while you remain stubborn, well, that's going to create some interesting dynamics between you two. The threat was clear and cruel. They were going to pit him against Celia, make them compete to see who would break first. I want to see her, Maduro said. I have the right to, you have no rights, the man repeated patiently. But seeing your wife could be arranged, as a privilege, not a right. All you have to do is show good faith, answer a few simple questions, give us some information that we can verify, prove that you're willing to cooperate, and we'll consider allowing a supervised meeting with Celia. That's the deal. Maduro's mind was racing. Every instinct told him this was manipulation, that nothing this man said could be trusted. But the isolation was already wearing on him. The uncertainty about Celia's safety was agonizing, and the possibility of seeing her, even briefly, even under guard, was almost overwhelming in its appeal. What kind of questions? He asked cautiously. The man smiled slightly, recognizing the crack in Maduro's resistance. Let's start with something simple. Rafael told us you have at least 3 accounts in Swiss banks under shell company names. He knew about 2 of them, but suspected there was a third. Confirm that for us. Give us the name of the 3rd shell company, and we'll arrange for you to see Celia tomorrow. It was a small thing, Maduro told himself. 1 shell company name. That wouldn't really hurt anything. The Americans probably already knew about the account anyway, if Rafael had told them about the other 2, and the chance to see Celia, to confirm she was okay, to speak with her even briefly, that was worth a small piece of information. But another part of his mind, the part that had survived decades of political warfare, recognized this for what it was. The first step down a slope that would gradually steep. First 1 shell company name, then account numbers, then passwords. Each small compromise leading to larger ones until he'd given them everything and had nothing left to bargain with. No, Maduro said, his voice stronger now. I won't answer any questions without my attorney present, and I won't be manipulated by threats about my wife. If you want to torture me, go ahead, but I'm not cooperating. The man's expression didn't change. He calmly collected his photographs and documents, returning them to the folder. That's disappointing, Mr. Maduro, but not surprising. Most people need more time to adjust to their new reality. We'll talk again tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. We have 6 months before your trial, plenty of time for you to reconsider your position. He stood and gestured to the guards, who opened the door. Before leaving, the man turned back one more time. One more thing you should know. Rafael didn't just betray you for money. He's been a CIA asset for 4 years. We recruited him in 2020, turned him with a combination of financial incentives and evidence of crimes he'd committed that we threatened to expose. Everything you told him, every conversation he witnessed, every private moment you thought was secure. All of it was reported back to us. We know things about you that you've never told anyone except him. So when I say we have overwhelming evidence, I'm not exaggerating. Your bodyguard gave us everything." The door closed with a heavy metallic thunk. Maduro sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. 4 years. Rafael had been working for the CIA for 4 years. Every security briefing he'd attended, every conversation about sensitive operations, every moment of vulnerability when Maduro had relied on his bodyguard's loyalty, all of it compromised. All of it reported to American intelligence. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. How many operations had failed because Rafael warned the Americans? How many of Maduro's allies had been arrested or killed because of information Rafael provided? How many strategic decisions had been made based on faulty assumptions about security because Maduro hadn't known his own bodyguard was an enemy agent? And if Rafael had been compromised for 4 years, who else had been turned? How deep did American penetration go into the Venezuelan government? Was anyone truly loyal, or had his entire administration been infiltrated? The paranoia was exactly what they wanted him to feel. Maduro recognized that on an intellectual level, isolation plus uncertainty, plus strategic revelation of betrayal, it was classic intelligence tradecraft designed to break down a subject's psychological defenses. But knowing he was being manipulated didn't make the manipulation less effective. He really was alone. He really was surrounded by enemies, and he really had no way of knowing who, if anyone, he could trust. Hours passed in darkness and silence. The observation slot would open periodically. Eyes would check on him, then it would close again. Each time Maduro found himself hoping it would be someone coming to tell him he could see Celia. Each time he was disappointed. Eventually exhaustion overcame anxiety, and Maduro fell into a fitful sleep. His dreams were chaotic and disturbing. Rafael's face appearing in shadows. Delcy sitting in that office, signing documents that dissolved Venezuela. Celia calling out to him from somewhere he couldn't reach. Trump's voice echoing through empty corridors, mocking his downfall. He woke to the sound of the door opening again. A different person this time, a woman in her 30s, also in civilian clothes. She carried a tray with food, plain rice, some kind of meat that might have been chicken, water in a plastic cup. She set it on the small shelf that folded down from the wall. "Breakfast," she said in English. "You need to eat. Interrogations are much more effective when subjects are fed and relatively healthy. Starvation is counterproductive." "What time is it?" Maduro asked. "Does it matter?" She smiled slightly. "You're going to be here for a while, Mr. Maduro. Time stops being meaningful after the first few days. Eat, you'll feel better." She left before he could ask any questions. Maduro looked at the food with suspicion. Was it drugged, poisoned? But that didn't make sense. If they wanted him dead or drugged, there were easier ways to accomplish it. They were feeding him because they wanted him functional for interrogation. He ate slowly, his stomach rebelling slightly against food after hours of stress and anxiety. The meat was bland and overcooked. The rice was sticky, but it was nutrition, and he needed to maintain his strength if he was going to resist their pressure. After eating, Maduro began a deliberate exercise routine in the tiny cell. Push-ups, squats, stretching, anything to keep his body active and his mind focused. The physical activity helped, gave him something to control when everything else was beyond his power. He was halfway through his second set of push-ups when the door opened again. The first man returned, the one who had shown him the photographs of Rafael and Delcy. Feeling energetic. "I see. That's good. Shows resilience. I respect that." He sat in the same folding chair. "I've been authorized to offer you something. A gesture of good faith from our side." Maduro stood up, breathing hard from the exercise. "What kind of gesture?" "A phone call. 3 minutes. Monitored and recorded. With anyone you choose. Your attorney, a family member, even acting President Rodriguez if you want. 3 minutes to confirm that the outside world still exists, that you're not completely cut off. All we ask in return is that you answer one question honestly. Here it was again. The bargain. The trade. Small privileges in exchange for small pieces of information. Maduro knew he should refuse on principle. But the thought of hearing another voice, of making contact with someone beyond this cell, was almost unbearably appealing. What question? Rafael told us, you had a meeting with Chinese military officials in August 2024. He said you discussed allowing China to establish a naval facility on Venezuelan territory. We want to know if that's true, and if so, what the current status of those negotiations is. It was a significant question, not just about money or personal corruption, but about military and strategic issues that could affect international relations. Answering it would be a real betrayal of Venezuelan interests. That's classified information, Maduro said. Information that affects national security. You don't have a nation anymore, the man interrupted. Venezuela has a new government that's cooperating with the United States. You're not protecting national security by withholding information. You're just being stubborn, and that stubborn costs you a phone call. Costs you 3 minutes of connection to the world outside this cell. Is it worth it? Maduro thought about who he would call if he accepted the bargain. His attorney, Marcus Richardson, was the obvious choice, but Richardson was probably being monitored. His communications intercepted. Anything Maduro said to him would be analyzed by American intelligence. His daughter? She was somewhere in Venezuela, probably terrified about what had happened to her parents. Hearing his voice might comfort her, or it might put her at risk if the Americans decided to use her as leverage. If I answer your question, Maduro said slowly, and you let me make a phone call, how do I know you won't just use whatever I say on that call against me? Against whoever I'm talking to. Against whoever I'm talking to. You don't, the man admitted. That's the nature of your situation. You have to make decisions without guarantees, without safety nets. But I'll tell you this much. We're not interested in persecuting your family or your attorney. We're interested in you. The information you provide, the cooperation you offer or withhold, that's what matters to us. So yes, we'll monitor the call, but we're not going to use it to harm whoever you talk to, unless they're involved in criminal activity we're unaware of. It was probably a lie, or at least a partial lie. But Maduro was discovering that isolation did strange things to judgment. After hours alone in a cold cell, with no information and no human contact except hostile interrogators, even a monitored phone call seemed like a gift. Yes, Maduro said quietly. There were discussions with Chinese officials about a naval facility, but nothing was finalized. We were still in preliminary negotiations about terms and locations. The status of those negotiations when I was captured was uncertain. The Chinese were demanding more concessions than we wanted to give, and we were concerned about American reaction. The man made notes in a small tablet. Location under discussion. Maduro hesitated. This was more detailed information, more specific betrayal, but he'd already crossed the line. Might as well get the full value of the trade. Peninsula de Paraguaná, deep water port, strategic location. The Chinese wanted a 99-year lease, similar to what they have in other locations. We were negotiating for something shorter, and the current status, to your knowledge, stalled. The economic crisis made it difficult to negotiate from a position of strength. We needed Chinese support, but couldn't give them everything they wanted. When I was captured, no agreements had been signed. The man nodded, apparently satisfied. Okay, that's good information. Verifiable and specific. Thank you for your cooperation. He pulled out a phone and placed it on the shelf beside the food tray. 3 minutes. You can call anyone with a working number. The timer starts when the call connects. Maduro picked up the phone with trembling hands. Who should he call? Richardson was the safe choice, the professional choice. But suddenly, desperately, he wanted to hear his daughter's voice. Wanted to tell her he loved her, that he was surviving, that she shouldn't worry. He dialed her number from memory, praying it hadn't been changed or disconnected. The phone rang twice before she answered. Hello? Her voice sounded cautious, probably not recognizing the number. "Rosa, it's your father." "Papa." The word came out as a sob. "Papa, where are you? Are you okay? What's happening?" "I'm alive. I'm on an American ship. They're treating me." He glanced at the interrogator watching him. "They're treating me correctly. How are you? How's your mother?" "I don't know. No one will tell me anything." "Papa, they're saying terrible things on the news. They're saying you trafficked drugs, that you killed people. It can't be true." "Rosa, listen to me carefully. Whatever they say, whatever evidence they show, remember that your father loved his country, loved you and your mother. Everything I did believing it was necessary for Venezuela." "Papa, I don't understand." "You don't need to understand right now. Just remember that I love you. Tell your mother I love her if you can get a message to her. Tell her to be strong." "How can I get a message to her? She's being held by the Americans too. Nobody can reach her." The realization that Rosa had no more information about Celia than he did was devastating. They were all isolated. All kept deliberately ignorant of each other's status. "Stay strong," Maduro said, his voice breaking. "Take care of yourself. Don't talk to reporters. Don't make any statements. Let our attorneys handle everything. And Rosa, I'm sorry for everything that's happened, for what you're going through. I'm so sorry." "Papa." The line went dead. The 3 minutes were up. The interrogator reached over and took the phone back. "That's all. But I'll note in my report that you cooperated. That might earn you another call in a few days if you continue to be helpful." After he left, Maduro lay on the bunk and finally allowed himself to cry. Quiet tears at first, then racking sobs that he tried to muffle against the thin pillow. He'd betrayed classified information for a 3-minute phone call. He'd heard his daughter's voice but couldn't comfort her or explain or make anything better. And Celia was somewhere on this ship, going through her own nightmare, and he had no way to reach her or protect her. The first night aboard the USS Iwo Jima wasn't even over yet, and Maduro had already begun to break. He'd told himself he would resist, would maintain his integrity, would refuse to cooperate no matter what pressure they applied, but they hadn't needed to apply much pressure at all. Just isolation and uncertainty, and the promise of a brief connection to the outside world, that had been enough to make him talk. If this was just the beginning, if they had months to work on him with increasingly sophisticated techniques, how much more would he give up? How many more betrayals would he rationalize as necessary for small comforts? The cell felt smaller than ever. The walls closer, the ceiling lower, and the long night stretched ahead with no promise of dawn.